Staff Sergeant Nora Mitchell had learned to read a room by what came back on the trays. 15 years in food service had taught her things no manual ever could. That a soldier scraping his plate clean meant a good day. That half-eaten meals piling up during a training cycle meant stress was winning. That silence at the tables meant something was wrong long before anyone said a word about it. She didn't need after-action reports. She had tray return. So on a Thursday evening in late September, standing behind the serving line of a dining facility on a base so remote the nearest real town was 90 minutes away, Nora watched Private First Class Castillo take a scoop of rice, one piece of chicken, and nothing else. No vegetables, no roll, no cobbler, even though it was Thursday, and Castillo hadn't missed a Thursday cobbler in the year she'd known him. He ate maybe a third of it, checked his watch twice, and left before the rest of his squad even sat down. It wasn't the first time. Nora had been counting for 3 weeks now, the trays coming back fuller of food than they should have, soldiers timing their meals for the last 10 minutes before closing, when the line was empty and no one would notice how little they took. Something was happening to her soldiers, and it wasn't a diet fad, and it wasn't a training cycle. Whatever it was, they were hiding it well enough that no one else on this base had noticed. No one but the woman standing behind the serving line, watching the trays, doing the only kind of reconnaissance she knew how to do. Nora set down her spatula and made a decision. Tomorrow, she'd start asking questions. The dining facility smelled like garlic and steam heat, the way it always did an hour before closing, when the dinner rush thinned out and the trays started coming back only half-eaten. Staff Sergeant Nora Mitchell stood behind the serving line with a spatula in one hand and a clipboard tucked under her arm, watching the door the way she always did, counting faces, not just bodies. She'd been running this DFAC for going on 2 years now, out here at a base so remote that the nearest town was a 90-minute drive on a road that flooded twice a year. It wasn't glamorous work. Nobody joined the Army dreaming of managing a chow hall. But Nora had learned a long time ago that feeding people was its own kind of intelligence gathering. You could tell more about a unit's morale from what was left on the trays than from any command climate survey. Private First Class Castillo came through the line at 1840, right at the tail end of service. He was a wiry kid, maybe 21, with the kind of tired eyes that came from working details all day and studying for his next rank at night. Nora had watched him grow into a decent soldier over the past year, the kind who showed up early and didn't complain, even when complaining would have been fair. Tonight he took a scoop of rice, a single piece of chicken, and skipped the vegetables entirely. No roll, no dessert, even though it was Thursday, which meant cobbler, which Castillo usually took 2 servings of. He sat by himself, ate maybe a third of what was on the tray, checked his watch twice, and left. Nora watched him go and felt something settle in her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. Not alarm, exactly. More like the low hum of a smoke detector before you find the actual fire. It wasn't just Castillo. She'd started noticing it about 3 weeks back. First with a few soldiers, then more. Trays coming back barely touched. Soldiers timing their meals for the last 10 minutes before closing, when the line was empty and nobody would see how little they took. A couple of the junior enlisted who used to load their plates full now took the smallest portions the serving staff would let them get away with. She'd mentioned it once to her assistant manager, Sergeant First Class Dobbins, a heavy-set man who'd been running dining facilities since before Nora enlisted. He'd shrugged it off. Some units go through phases, diet fads, whatever. They'll come back around. Maybe. But Nora had a feeling that wasn't it. She finished closing out the serving line, sent the junior soldiers on KP home, and stood alone in the kitchen a while longer than she needed to, wiping down a counter that was already clean. It was a habit from years ago. The quiet after service was the only time she ever really thought. Nora had grown up the 4th of 6 kids in a house where dinner was never quite big enough for everyone, and her mother had a particular talent for making a pot of beans look like it belonged to a full meal. She remembered being 9 years old and telling her mother she wasn't hungry, just so her younger brothers could have her portion. She'd gotten good at lying about being full, good enough that it had taken her mother years to catch on. She didn't like to think about that part of her life much. It was old news, buried under 15 years of military service, a marriage that hadn't survived 2 deployments, and a promotion track that had made her one of the more respected staff sergeants on this base, even if her job title made people's eyes glaze over at reunions. But she recognized the look on Castillo's face. She recognized it because she'd worn it herself, a long time ago, at a much smaller kitchen table. She glanced at the duty roster pinned to the corkboard by her office door. Names and units scrawled in different handwriting. Meal card numbers logged automatically by the swipe system. She could pull data if she wanted to, see exactly who was eating less, how often, since when. It felt almost like snooping. This wasn't her business, not officially. Nutrition counseling wasn't in her lane. She ran a chow hall. She wasn't a chaplain, wasn't a first sergeant, wasn't anybody's mother. But she thought about Castillo checking his watch twice before he even sat down, like eating was something he had to budget time for, the same way you'd budget anything else that cost you. Nora untied her apron, hung it on the hook by the walk-in cooler, and instead of heading back to her room like she normally would, she pulled a folding chair over near the tray return and sat down with her clipboard. She had another hour before the night shift needed her sign-off on inventory. She could spend it filling out paperwork, or she could stay a little longer tomorrow night, corner one of these kids under some excuse that wouldn't spook them, and just ask. She made her decision before she even realized she'd made it. Tomorrow, she'd start with Castillo. The next evening, Nora waited until the dining facility had cleared out to almost nothing. Just the hum of the walk-in cooler and the clatter of pans being scrubbed in the back. Castillo was on the closing detail that week, which gave her exactly the opening she needed. "Castillo," she called out, "give me a hand stacking these chairs before you head out." It wasn't unusual. NCOs pulled soldiers for small tasks all the time, and Castillo didn't think twice about it. He set down his rag and started flipping chairs onto tables alongside her, the two of them working in a rhythm that gave conversation room to breathe without forcing it. "You didn't eat much last night," Nora said, keeping her tone light, like she was commenting on the weather. Castillo's hands paused for half a second on a chair leg before he kept going. "Wasn't that hungry, Sergeant? You take 2 helpings of cobbler every Thursday. I've watched you do it for a year." He gave a short laugh, more nerves than humor. "I guess I'm watching my weight." Nora set down the chair she was holding and looked at him. Not sharply, just steady. The way you'd look at someone you were giving room to, be honest. "Castillo, I'm not writing you up for skipping dessert. I'm asking because I've noticed some of you looking worn thin lately, and I'd rather hear it from you than guess." The kitchen was quiet except for the drip of a faucet somewhere behind them. Castillo stared at the stack of chairs like they held the answer to something. "It's stupid," he finally said. "Try me." He exhaled, long and slow, the kind of breath that came from carrying something a while. "My dad got hurt on a job site back home. Can't work right now, maybe not for months. My mom's got 3 of us younger than me still at the house, and the rent's due regardless of whether his hand heals." He shrugged like it was simple math, because to him, it was. "I send home most of my check. Keep enough for gas and laundry. Figured I don't need to spend money eating out or buying extra when the DFAC's free anyway." "Except you're not eating enough of what's free either," Nora said quietly. Castillo's jaw tightened. "I eat enough to get by." "That's not the same thing as eating enough." He didn't answer that. He just picked up another chair, more to have something to do with his hands than because it needed stacking. "Please don't make a thing out of this, Sergeant," he said after a moment. "I don't want people looking at me different. I don't want my platoon sergeant thinking I can't handle my own finances. I'm handling it. I'm handling it tight, that's all." Nora studied him for a long moment, weighing what to say. She thought about her own mother, and the particular kind of pride that came from carrying weight nobody asked you to carry, and how that pride could be a soldier's best quality and worst blind spot at the same time. "I'm not going to make a thing out of it," she said finally. "You have my word. But do me a favor. Take the full tray tomorrow. All of it. I'll know if you don't." Castillo almost smiled at that. "Yes, Sergeant." He finished the chairs and left, and Nora stood alone in the dining facility a while longer, the overhead lights buzzing faintly above the empty tables. She didn't sleep well that night. She kept turning Castillo's words over, "I'm handling it tight," and thinking about how many other soldiers on this base might be handling things tight in ways nobody noticed because nobody was looking at the trays. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep entirely, pulled a legal pad from her desk drawer, and started writing down names. Not officially. Not from any system she had access to outside her own memory. Just faces she'd cataloged without meaning to over the past few weeks. Soldiers who used to load their plates and now took the bare minimum. Soldiers who lingered near closing so the line would be empty. Soldiers who'd stopped buying the extra snacks from the small shop counter near the exit. By the time she set the pen down, she had 6 names. Castillo was only one of them. She sat back in her chair and stared at the list for a long time, the quiet of her room pressing in around her. 6 soldiers. Maybe more she hadn't noticed yet. And if Castillo's story was anything close to typical, this wasn't about diet fads or busy schedules. This was something bigger than she'd let herself consider the night before. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd start finding out just how big. Over the next week, Nora worked her way through the list on her legal pad the same careful way she'd approached Castillo. Never a formal sit-down. Never anything that looked like an interrogation. She pulled soldiers aside for small tasks, walked with them to the supply closet, lingered near the tray return when she knew they'd be coming through. She made herself easy to talk to, and mostly, she just listened. The second name on her list was Specialist Renee Ashford, a supply soldier who'd been quieter than usual for months. Nora caught her one afternoon restocking napkin dispensers and asked, without much preamble, how she was holding up. Ashford's composure cracked faster than Castillo's had. Her older sister was raising Ashford's own son back home, an arrangement that had started as temporary help during Ashford's first deployment and had never fully unwound. Ashford sent almost her entire paycheck to cover daycare, school clothes, a mounting stack of pediatrician bills. "I FaceTime him twice a week," Ashford said, not quite meeting Nora's eyes. "That's the part that's hard, not the money. The money I can live without eating for." The third was a young corporal named Whitfield, whose father had been diagnosed with a heart condition that insurance only partially covered. The fourth was a private in the motor pool, one of 3 siblings, whose mother had lost her job at a plant that closed down that spring. Each conversation followed its own shape, but the pattern underneath was the same. Soldiers young enough to still be finding their footing, carrying financial weight that belonged, by any fair accounting, to the whole family, not to one 20-year-old private drawing E3 pay. Nora kept her list updated at night, names and details, careful never to write anything that could embarrass anyone if the page fell into the wrong hands. She told herself she was just trying to understand the scope of it. She wasn't sure yet what she'd do with the understanding. Then, on a Tuesday morning during company PT, Danny Ruiz went down. Nora heard about it secondhand, from Dobbins, who'd heard about it from someone in battalion. Ruiz, a private she recognized from her own list, quiet, always polite, the kind of soldier who said, "Thank you, Sergeant," every single time she handed him a tray, had collapsed near the end of a company run. He was conscious, the medic said, but dehydrated, weak, his blood sugar low enough that the flight surgeon wanted him monitored overnight before clearing him back to duty. Nora found an excuse to walk past the aid station that afternoon and caught the physician assistant, a soft-spoken captain named Reyes, on his way out. "He'll be fine," Reyes told her, reading the concern on her face correctly even though she hadn't said much. "But I'll tell you, Sergeant Mitchell, that wasn't heat exhaustion. That was a kid running 6 miles on an empty stomach. His labs looked like someone who hasn't eaten a real meal in days." Nora felt something cold settle low in her gut. Is he going to be flagged for it? Failure to maintain fitness standards? Something like that? Reyes shrugged. non-committal in the careful way medical officers were trained to be. That's above my pay grade. But if this happens again, and somebody starts asking why one of my soldiers keeps showing up malnourished, it stops being a medical question and starts being a readiness question. That's a different conversation, and it's not one that ends well for him. Nora thanked him and walked back toward the dining facility slower than she needed to, turning the warning over in her mind. This had gone past something she could handle quietly with extra portions and a few kind words. Ruiz could have been seriously hurt. He still might get flagged, might get pulled into a counseling session that put his financial situation on record, might get looked at sideways by a chain of command that had no context for why a soldier who used to run a solid 6-minute mile was suddenly stumbling through PT. She sat in her office that evening with the legal pad open in front of her. 6 names, soon to be 7, she suspected, once she talked to Ruiz properly, staring back at her like a problem she couldn't feed her way out of. The obvious move was to report it. Go to the first sergeant, lay out what she'd noticed, let the chain of command handle it the way the chain of command was supposed to handle soldier welfare issues. That was the safe choice. The choice that covered her if anyone ever asked why a dining facility manager had been running her own informal welfare check without telling anyone. But she kept thinking about Castillo's face when he'd asked her not to make a thing out of it. Kept thinking about Ashford saying the money I can live without eating for. Like sacrifice was just something you did quietly and without complaint. If Nora reported this up the chain, these soldiers wouldn't just get help, they'd get files. Counseling statements. Maybe command attention that painted them as financially irresponsible instead of what they actually were, which was kids trying to hold their families together with whatever was left of an E3 paycheck after the wiring fee. There had to be another way. One that got them fed without costing them their dignity or their careers. Nora didn't have an answer yet, but she knew someone who might. Master Sergeant Earl Whitcomb had retired from the Army 6 years back after 24 years in food service. Most of it spent running dining facilities, not unlike the one Nora managed now. These days he split his time between a part-time job at the hardware store in the nearest town and volunteering at the local VFW post, where he ran the Friday fish fry like it was still a mission-essential task. Nora had met him during her first month on this assignment, when he'd shown up at the DFAC uninvited to make sure the new sergeant wasn't running things into the ground. They'd stayed in loose touch since, the occasional phone call, a standing invitation to the VFW fish fry that Nora rarely had time to take him up on. She called him on a Wednesday night and laid out the situation without naming names, careful to keep the specifics general enough that no one soldier could be identified. Whitcomb listened without interrupting, the way he always did, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You know what you're describing," he said finally, "is something we used to see all the time, back when I was running the DFAC at Bragg. Young soldiers sending everything home, going without. Command never had a clean way to handle it because it always turns into a paperwork problem instead of a people problem." "That's exactly it," Nora said. "I don't want it to become a paperwork problem for them." "So don't let it," Whitcomb said. "Handle it like a people problem." He told her about a small charity out of the county seat, Helping Hands for Military Families, run mostly by veteran spouses who understood the particular pride that came with a uniform and didn't want charity to feel like charity. They did grocery gift cards, sometimes utility assistance, quietly and without much paperwork, so long as someone vouched for the need. "I can make a call," Whitcomb offered. "Get you a contact. But Nora, you understand you're about to take on something that's going to eat your time and probably some of your own money, and nobody's going to know you did it." "That's the point," Nora said. Over the following 2 weeks, the program took shape in pieces, always at the edges of Nora's regular duties. Whitcomb connected her with a woman named Patty Dresser at Helping Hands, who arranged for gift cards to arrive at the base's off-post mail contract addresses that several soldiers already used, listed as coming from a community appreciation program, with no further explanation attached. Nora coordinated the names and amounts through Whitcomb, never through her own base email, never through anything that could be traced back to the dining facility directly. For the food itself, she got creative within the bounds of what she could actually control. The DFAC always overordered slightly to account for surge days, and there was a standing practice of donating near-expiration goods to the shelter in town rather than tossing them. Nora simply expanded that practice, routing a portion of those goods instead toward care packages that Whitcomb's VFW buddies delivered under the label of Veteran Outreach. Left anonymously outside barracks doors or handed off during PT formations by people the soldiers had no reason to connect to Nora at all. It wasn't without risk. One evening, a supply NCO named Sergeant Ochoa caught Nora loading a case of shelf-stable meals into her own truck after hours and asked, not unkindly, what she was doing. "Donation run," Nora said, keeping her voice even. "VFW does a food drive for local families. I coordinate with them sometimes." Ochoa shrugged, satisfied, and didn't ask further. But Nora's pulse hadn't slowed for a good 10 minutes after he walked away. She started being more careful after that, timing her runs for later in the evening, varying her routine so nothing looked patterned enough to draw a second glance. Ruiz got his first gift card 2 weeks after his collapse, delivered to the off-post box he used for exactly this reason, so nothing showed up where his platoon sergeant might see it. Nora heard about it secondhand through Reyes, who mentioned offhand that Ruiz seemed to be eating better, color back in his face, no more dizzy spells during PT. Ashford started taking full portions again without anyone prompting her. Castillo, when Nora checked his tray one Thursday, had cobbler on it. 2 servings, like always. She watched it happen in small pieces over the following month. Soldiers looking less gray around the eyes, less like they were rationing themselves through a war nobody else could see. None of them connected any of it to her. The gift cards came from a non-profit 2 counties over. The care packages came from strangers in VFW caps. The extra rations came from a supply chain too ordinary to question. Nora kept doing her job, running the serving line, signing off on inventory, watching the trays come back fuller than they had in months, and said nothing to anyone about the quiet machinery she'd built underneath all of it. It cost her more than she let herself tally too closely. Evenings, gas money, a good chunk of her own paycheck funneled through Whitcomb when Helping Hands resources ran thin 1 month. But she thought about Castillo's 2 servings of cobbler, and it felt like the kind of cost that didn't need counting. By late fall, the dining facility looked the way it had before Nora had ever started noticing empty trays. Full plates, seconds taken without hesitation, the easy noise of soldiers who weren't quietly rationing themselves through dinner. But something had shifted among the soldiers on Nora's original list, something that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with a question they couldn't stop asking each other. It started with Ashford, who mentioned to Castillo over a game of cards one evening that she'd gotten a $50 grocery gift card in the mail with no return address. Just a note that said from a community appreciation program, "Thank you for your service." Castillo went quiet for a second, then admitted he'd gotten something similar 2 months back. Not a gift card, but a box of protein bars and instant meals left outside his barracks door. No name attached. Whitfield had a story too. So did the private from the motor pool. So, eventually, did Ruiz, who'd been the most tight-lipped about his hospital stay and hadn't told anyone the real reason behind it until Ashford pressed him, gently, over the same card game. "Somebody's been taking care of all of us," Ashford said, laying her cards down slower than the hand required. "That's not a coincidence." They started comparing notes in earnest after that. Dates, amounts, small details. A grocery card here, a clerical adjustment, to a pay period allowance there that none of them could quite explain through normal channels. Ruiz remembered a woman in a VFW cap dropping off a box during a company run, and someone else remembered a similar figure near the off-post mailboxes. None of it pointed anywhere solid. Whoever was behind it had been careful. They floated theories in the DFAC over lunch one afternoon, half serious, half joking, the way soldiers did when they wanted to talk about something without admitting how much it mattered to them. "Gotta be the chaplain," Whitfield offered. "Guy's always fishing for who needs help." "Nah, chaplain would have said something by now," Castillo said. "My money's on Sergeant Mitchell." He nodded toward the serving line, where Nora was refilling a tray of green beans, half listening without letting it show. She's the one who actually looks at us like she's paying attention. A few of them laughed, and Ashford called out, loud enough to carry, "Sergeant Mitchell, you got something you want to tell us?" Nora looked up, feigned confusion with the easy skill of someone who'd been managing soldiers' moods for 15 years. "I've got a green bean shortage and a dishwasher that keeps jamming. That's about all I've got to confess." They laughed again and let it go, the way people do when a joke has run its course, and Nora went back to the serving line with her heart beating a little harder than the moment called for. She'd expected questions eventually. She hadn't expected how badly she'd want to answer them honestly. She didn't. She kept doing what she'd been doing, refilling trays, signing inventory, driving the occasional evening run to Whitcomb's truck with a case of shelf-stable meals in the bed, and let the mystery stay a mystery. Winter came on, and the base settled into its slower seasonal rhythm. On a Friday evening in December, Nora found herself lingering later than usual after service, watching from behind the serving line as Castillo, Ashford, Ruiz, and Whitfield sat together at the same table, the way they'd started doing more often since the card game that had started their whole investigation. Their trays were full. Their conversation was easy, the kind of easy that came from people who weren't quietly carrying something heavy and hidden anymore. Ruiz laughed at something Ashford said, loud enough to draw a look from Dobbins, who muttered something about kids these days, and went back to his paperwork. Castillo reached for a second helping of cobbler without checking his watch first. Nora untied her apron and hung it on the hook by the walk-in cooler, the same way she did every night, and let herself watch the table a moment longer than she needed to. She thought about her mother, all those years ago, pretending not to notice a 9-year-old claiming she wasn't hungry. She thought about how long it had taken her mother to catch on, and how her mother had never once made a show of the catching. Just started serving Nora's plate a little fuller, without a word, until the lying stopped being necessary. Some kinds of care worked better in the dark. Some kinds of leadership didn't need a name attached to matter. They just needed someone willing to notice, and to keep noticing, long after the noticing stopped being convenient. Nora didn't need Castillo or Ashford or Ruiz to know it had been her. She didn't need the credit, and some quiet part of her suspected the not knowing was doing something for them too, letting them believe the world could still surprise them with kindness that asked for nothing back. She flipped off the kitchen lights, one bank at a time, and left the 4 of them laughing over dessert in the last warm pool of light in the dining facility, fed and steady, and never once looking her way. And now, dear viewers, I want to thank you for watching this video to the end. If Nora's story moved you the way it moved me to write it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you soon.